Continuing on with our short-term regulation of blood pressure, we're moving into the chemoreceptor initiated pathways. Now these might look familiar because the carotid sinus, aortic arch, large arteries, they're all the same as the baroreceptor mediated pathway. But this time now, instead of pressure, we're looking at chemicals. Specifically, we're focusing on a rise in hydrogen ions and carbon dioxide. Well, a rise in hydrogen ions means the pH is getting lower, more acidic. Not what you want. A rise in carbon dioxide also is bad because you're trying to get rid of that byproduct. And then a drop in O2. If you're not having enough oxygen in your blood, also that's a problem. So these chemoreceptors, with any of those three things happening, increase in hydrogen ion, increase in carbon dioxide, decrease in oxygen, are going to trigger an increase in blood pressure. And that's going via that vasomotor center we already discussed. So therefore, you're going to be increasing the heart rate, you're going to be increasing contractility, you're going to be vasoconstricting. All these trying to increase pressure because of these chemicals being out of their homeostatic balance. Now this one plays a huge role in the regulation of your respiratory rates. Now we'll get to that respiratory rates and that a little more in the respiratory system. Just keep in mind, we're going to tie back into this again. So when we start talking about lungs and the respiratory rate and the physiology, in that unit, we'll come back to all of this about blood pressure regulation. So as you start learning about this blood pressure regulation now, keep that in mind. It's not going anywhere. We're going to deal with that in several upcoming units. All right, hormonal control. So now we had the neural control, we had the baroreceptor control, we just had the chemoreceptor. Now it's the hormonal control. And for this one, there's a lot here, so I'm going to throw it full screen. When you're looking at hormonal control, it works in both a short-term and a long-term mechanism way. We'll start with the short-term. On the short-term side of things, you're noticing it can stimulate a sympathetic response, which means that's epinephrine, norepinephrine. Now we know from talking about the heart that epinephrine is going to increase cardiac output. But epinephrine also is increasing peripheral vasoconstriction. Both of these are increasing blood pressure. Well, if you increase blood pressure, we're back to where we want to be. Because we initially decreased it, this was the way of going back up and increasing back to balance, back to homeostasis. But there's also a long-term mechanism that is going to be hormonal controlled. So if your blood pressure is dropping and staying down in a long-term situation, now you're looking at the kidneys producing renin. Renin, again, is a hormone. We mentioned that before in the endocrine system. So renin itself is going to go into the angiotensin cascade, eventually producing angiotensin II. That then is going to cause the antidiuretic hormone to be released, and you're thirsty. Well, what that does is it's not only going to help with increasing blood volume, antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone also help with cardiac output because you're increasing blood volume there too. And again, homeostatic restored, back to balance. The other one was erythropoietin down here. The kidneys produce erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is going to increase red blood cell count. If you increase the red blood cell count, you increase the blood volume. Increase the blood volume, you've increased your blood pressure. You're now back to homeostatic balance. So it doesn't matter if it's long-term or if it's short-term, there are mechanisms from the endocrine system that help out with blood pressure regulation. So all of this is determined, though, on what's the cause. Is it something that lasts for a couple minutes, maybe an hour, or is something that's lasting over days, weeks, or months? Because when you start thinking about long-term regulation, a lot of times it's the renal system, the kidneys, that are acting on long-term blood pressure regulation. What's happening here is the baroreceptors that typically are used in short-term regulation they very quickly are going to adapt or get used to the high or the low blood pressure if it's there chronically. They just are normal saying, hey, it's been high for a couple days, this must be correct. Or it's been low for a week, this must be correct. Well, it's not correct. Your body knows this, but the baroreceptors have become sensitized to the high or low chronic blood pressure. So therefore, we need to have the renal system, the kidneys, kind of help out with modifying and adjusting things on more of the long-term system pathway. So what you're doing here is we're now altering the blood volume. Alter the blood volume still can alter the pressure, but it's now of a long-term system because you're trying to either increase or decrease the amount that's retained inside the vessels. So blood volume is more of a long-term mechanism here. The kidneys can act either directly or indirectly to do this. Now, the direct action is when the kidneys themselves are doing this without endocrine control or other things. They're simply knowing, hey, there's too much pressure or there's not enough pressure. The indirect mechanisms will be more endocrine-based, basically telling the kidneys there's some problems to work through this. So either way, it's still the renal system. You're still using the urinary system, but now it's a direct or an indirect. Now, the direct method you're looking at is if an increased blood pressure or an increased blood volume, the kidneys will eliminate more urine to get rid of it. By eliminating more urine, you're dropping the blood pressure back down. So that is a direct mechanism if you're too high. Now, if the blood pressure is too low, this one again can be a direct mechanism, but now instead, the kidneys are conserving water. You're not going to excrete as much. So by conserving the water, not excreting as much, it'll help to increase blood volume and therefore increase blood pressure. So that's how the direct mechanism is working. The kidneys can sense increase or decrease in blood pressure. So this one has a bit of information, so we're going to throw it full screen. You'll notice there's the direct pathway we'll start with, and then we'll get to the indirect pathway. In the direct pathway, we're going to assume that we have a drop in blood pressure. This drop in blood pressure is going to decrease the filtration by the kidneys. Because if we decrease filtration, we decrease the amount of urine formation. By forming less urine, we're conserving and keeping more water in the body. That's increasing the blood volume. Increase the blood volume, and then you increase your blood pressure. The goal being to head back to homeostatic balance. That's the direct mechanism. And it can work for a drop or an increase in blood pressure. This example was just going to be a drop. All right, indirect mechanism. We're still going to go with the drop in blood pressure here. Now, for the indirect mechanism, when that blood pressure drops, it's inhibiting the baroreceptors. By inhibiting the baroreceptors, you're going to increase sympathetic activity. Now, this increase in sympathetic activity is going to cause renin to be released from the kidneys. Now, we know that renin will go through the angiotensin cascade. So we're going to have angiotensinogen, which goes to angiotensin 1, which goes to angiotensin 2. Now, angiotensin 2 is going to have several different actions that will occur. In angiotensin 2, as long as you got to this point, so you're able to convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2 because you had the ACE enzyme, the angiotensin converting enzyme. So as long as you're at angiotensin 2, you can stimulate the adrenal cortex. If you stimulate the adrenal cortex, it produces aldosterone. We know aldosterone is going to increase sodium reabsorption. Therefore, sodium reabsorption, we know, increases blood volume of water. We also know that angiotensin 2 will stimulate the increase in ADH release and production. More antidiuretic hormone, ADH, means you absorb more water in the kidneys. Thirdly, you're going to increase your thirst response. You'll become more thirsty because of the hypothalamus, all from angiotensin II. If you're increasing in thirst, you're thirstier, you'll drink more water. And then we have vasoconstriction will occur. If you vasoconstrict, you're increasing your peripheral resistance, and you increase your mean arterial pressure. So overall, there's 4 different mechanisms that can come from this angiotensin II. So any one of these could alter blood pressure, but using all 4 together allows each one to only have to have a small effect to have a much larger impact on the system. That is the indirect method, because you can see how much is based on hormonal aspects. Now, sure, the kidneys play a huge role here because the kidneys produce renin. The kidneys are decreasing filtration, but it's based on the different hormones and the different ways aldosterone, the different ways angiotensin II are working. So it's an indirect and a direct renal mechanism. Which brings us to this very large chart. Now, it might look like there's a lot here, but it's trying to kind of summarize, bring a lot of parts and pieces together. So again, throw up full screen and let's take a look. If you have an increase in the activity of your muscular and respiratory pumps, so a lot of times that's going along with exercise, that's going to increase your venous return, increase your stroke volume, increase your cardiac output, increase blood pressure. We've already gone through this, but just to kind of keep things fresh and make sure we're reminding it. All right, if we have a decrease in the release of ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide, remember that came from the heart. If we have a decrease in that, that's going to increase the conservation of sodium. And therefore, if you increase the conservation of sodium, you increase the conservation of water, which increases blood volume, and therefore, again, you've increased venous return. So increasing venous return increases stroke volume because you're increasing that preload, that end diastolic volume. All right, let's go for fluid loss because of something problematic. Could be a hemorrhaging of blood. Could be excessive sweating. And when I say excessive sweating, it's not the, I'm working out and got a little bit of perspiration in my skin. It's you are just dripping sweat. There's a puddle at your feet. Massive amounts of water loss. That's going to cause a decrease in blood volume, a decrease in blood pressure, which then can go back into saying, hey, conserve more water, but it also goes down to the baroreceptors. The baroreceptors are going to stimulate the vasomotor center in the brain, saying, hey, you know what? Increase stroke volume, increase heart rate, and also decrease the diameter of blood vessels, vasoconstrict. That all together is trying to increase cardiac output and increase peripheral resistance, which either one of those by themselves will increase blood pressure. Take both together, you definitely are increasing pressure. If we look at stressors like exercise, which could be a good stress, a physical stress on your body. You could have a trauma, something that is more of a mental or an emotional stress. You could have an increase in body temperature. Any of these can have a multitude of effects. You can go directly to the vasomotor center to activate the vasomotor center, but also you'll have a drop in blood pH. That's an increase in hydrogen ion concentration, a drop in O2 levels, an increase in CO2 levels. That means those are all being picked up by the chemoreceptors. Those go directly into the brain and the vasomotor center again, causing the same exact result we had from the hemorrhaging or fluid loss. Increased stroke volume, increased heart rate, decreased vessel diameter. You could have some bloodborne chemicals. Think epinephrine, norepinephrine, antidiuretic hormone, angiotensin II. I mean, all these we've talked about, but put them together. What do? They cause a decrease in vessel diameter, vasoconstriction, increasing peripheral resistance, increasing blood pressure. Dehydration, not enough fluid, high hematocrit, which means too many red blood cells. That increases blood viscosity. If you increase blood viscosity, you're increasing peripheral resistance and therefore increasing pressure. And finally, increase in body size. The larger an individual gets, whether it's muscle or fat, whatever, the larger an individual gets, the longer the blood vessels get. Because increasing body mass needs a blood supply, which means there's more blood vessels. So if you increase the blood vessel length, you're increasing peripheral resistance. Increased peripheral resistance means you're increasing blood pressure. So overall, there is a lot of things that are impacting blood pressure. I mean, this whole chart here you can see has a huge impact because it's going on body size, dehydration, hematocrit levels, blood chemicals, stressors, fluid loss, atrial natriuretic peptide. You're looking at muscular pumps, respiratory pumps. All of this comes together to manage your blood pressure. So you have constant feedback, constant input from all those receptors of the short-term regulation as well as the long-term regulation. They're all working together to give you this homeostatic balance of blood pressure. Trying to make sure your blood pressure is either staying in balance or matching what you're trying to do to your body. What I mean by that is if you're exercising, you increase pressure to match. So a lot of things go into regulation of blood pressure, a lot of different parts and pieces. And almost never will only one single piece work by itself. More often than not, all these pieces are working together to keep your blood pressure where it needs to be.